There comes a moment in every woman's life when silence becomes her greatest strength, and it's in that silence that a man finally realizes what he was blind to when she was right in front of him. Silence is one of the most misunderstood forms of communication, yet it carries a power that words rarely match. When you choose silence, not out of bitterness, not out of manipulation, but out of self-respect, you create an energetic shift that cannot be ignored. There is something profoundly magnetic about a woman who no longer argues for her worth, who no longer pleads to be seen, who no longer chases someone to stay. The moment you stop trying to make someone understand your value is the moment they begin to feel the loss of it. And this is why men return after no contact. Your silence becomes an echo of everything he took for granted. When you withdraw, a man is left alone with the reality he once avoided. He remembers not the arguments, not the misunderstandings, but the warmth you carried effortlessly. He remembers your presence, your laughter, your support, the stability you created without asking for validation. Before, he may have felt entertained or reassured by your effort. Now, he feels the absence of it. Silence has a way of stripping away illusions. It reveals truth. And the truth is simple. People rarely notice how deeply they were held until the hands that held them are no longer there. Your silence stands as a boundary, a declaration that your peace is not up for negotiation. It is the moment you step out of emotional noise and into clarity. And clarity is something a man cannot ignore. While you sit in your silence, he sits in the consequences of his choices. He feels what life is like without the emotional presence he unconsciously depended on. He revisits the moments he dismissed. He replays the things you said, but he didn't truly hear at the time. Your silence becomes the teacher he never expected, the lesson he never thought he needed. And what surprises him most is that silence doesn't mean you stopped caring. It means you started caring for yourself. It means you refuse to carry a relationship on your own shoulders. It means you no longer volunteered for emotional labor he wasn't willing to share. That shift in energy unsettles him. For the first time, he recognizes that you were the emotional anchor, not him. You were the steady force, not the dependent one. And the moment a man sees this clearly, his ego dissolves into realization. In silence, you reclaim your power. You stop reacting. You stop explaining. You stop trying to justify your feelings to someone who never appreciated their depth. That is when he feels the change. He feels the distance. He feels the uncertainty, and uncertainty awakens desire. He begins to question what you're thinking, what you're feeling, whether you are moving on, whether someone else has noticed the worth he overlooked. Your silence creates a mystery he cannot solve, and that mystery pulls him back. Silence is not weakness. Silence is self-worth expressed without words, and that is why he returns, not because you waited, but because you finally stopped waiting. Absence has a way of awakening truths that presence sometimes hides. When you step back, when your voice is no longer accessible and your energy is no longer available on demand, something significant happens inside a man. He begins to reflect, not because you forced him to, not because you demanded answers, but because the silence you created becomes a mirror. And in that mirror, he sees everything with a clarity he never had when you were still there, giving, explaining, forgiving, and trying. Reflection is the birthplace of realization, and this is why men return after no contact. When your absence removes the emotional noise, he finally hears what your presence always tried to show him. In the quiet you create, he begins to remember moments he brushed off while he had them. He revisits your kindness, not because he suddenly became sentimental, but because silence slows down the pace of distraction. When a woman is present, a man often feels comfortable, sometimes too comfortable. He assumes your warmth will always be available. He assumes your patience is endless. He assumes your understanding is guaranteed. But the moment these comforts disappear, he feels a shift inside himself. What he once treated as ordinary, he begins to see as extraordinary. Your absence forces him to sit alone with his own behavior. He begins to recognize the texts he didn't respond to with intention. He replays the times you expressed a need that he dismissed because he thought you'd always be there tomorrow. He remembers the way your presence made life feel more grounded, more alive, more meaningful, but He remembers it only when it's gone. It is human nature. People realize importance when distance removes access. But men, especially, often awaken to emotional truth only through contrast. Your absence provides the contrast he needed but didn't know he was missing. As the days pass, the space you created becomes its own kind of energy. It challenges his ego because he expected you to reach out like before, to chase, to try to fix the disconnect. But when you don't, when you remain silent, when you stay rooted in your self-worth, he begins to question himself. Why hasn't she called? Why isn't she trying anymore? Has she changed? Has she moved on? Is someone else seeing what I failed to appreciate? These thoughts form the beginning of realization. He starts to understand that you were not waiting for him. You were choosing yourself. Reflection becomes uncomfortable for him because it forces him to see the truth he avoided while he had the safety of your presence. He realizes how much emotional stability you brought. He realizes how you made things feel lighter, calmer, more meaningful. He realizes that his life feels different, less anchored, less supported, without the energy you once provided so freely. Absence becomes the quiet doorway through which realization enters. And in that realization, he begins to understand what he lost. That understanding is what drives him back, not simply missing you, but recognizing the depth of what he once took for granted. Distance is not just physical space, it is energetic recalibration. When you choose to step back, when you stop initiating, stop explaining, stop overgiving, you restore a balance that was lost while you were trying too hard to hold everything together. Many relationships tilt without anyone noticing. One person becomes the giver, the explainer, the emotional stabilizer, while the other becomes the receiver, the one who assumes the effort will always continue. When you create distance through no contact, you shift this imbalance instantly. You release the weight you were carrying, and the dynamic between you resets in a way he cannot ignore. A man who once felt secure in your effort suddenly feels uncertainty creeping in. He begins to sense that something has changed. The emotional comfort he once leaned on is no longer within reach. The dynamic he unconsciously relied on dissolves the moment you reclaim your energy. And this is not punishment, it is alignment. When you step away, you are not trying to hurt him. You are simply returning to yourself. But in doing so, you force him to face the void where your presence used to be. That void creates the discomfort that triggers awareness. Distance has a powerful way of revealing truth. When you pull back, you stop filling the silence with explanations. You stop soothing his ego. You stop being the emotional bridge. He finally feels the natural consequences of his own behavior. Without your emotional labor, he can no longer hide from the reality of the relationship dynamic. He begins to see how much you are contributing, often without acknowledgement. He realizes that your presence wasn't just a routine, it was a foundation. The power dynamic shifts because your silence gives you back your leverage. When you are no longer available on demand, he starts to understand that attention is not guaranteed, affection is not guaranteed, and access to you is not guaranteed. That realization resets his mentality. Suddenly, he is the one questioning. He is the one wondering. He is the one trying to understand what changed. And this shift is what makes men return. They return when they feel that the woman they once assumed would stay has withdrawn her energy in a way that cannot be ignored. Distance also clarifies your worth in his eyes. When you were always there, he may have mistaken your consistency for neediness. But when you step back, he sees it for what it truly was: strength, loyalty, emotional investment, and commitment. He begins to respect what he previously overlooked. Respect grows not in closeness, but in the space where he feels your absence and recognizes the value you once brought effortlessly. Through distance, you reset not only the relationship dynamic, but also your own internal alignment. You return to your emotional center. You reconnect with your self-worth. And from that place of power, you no longer chase, because you have nothing to chase. He returns because the energy has shifted. He returns because he feels what he did not feel before. He returns because distance made him see what closeness made him forget. Energy is one of the most powerful forces in relationships, and yet it is often the least understood. You may think that no contact is simply a behavioral choice, a strategy, or a moment of silence, but it is far more than that. When you pull your energy back from someone who has been absorbing it without reciprocation, you create a shift that is felt on a level far deeper than logic or explanation. A man may not consciously understand why he suddenly feels uneasy, restless, or drawn back toward you, but he feels it because your energy is no longer flowing toward him. What he once felt constantly and effortlessly now becomes an absence he cannot ignore. For so long, your energy was a steady current in his life. Your caring messages, your checking in, your concern, your emotional warmth. Even on days when he wasn't giving you much, your presence acted as a quiet reassurance. When you stop pouring into someone, that flow doesn't disappear, it redirects. You begin investing in yourself, your peace, your growth, your emotional healing. And when your energy redirects back to you, it creates a glow around you that changes everything. He senses it, not because you tell him, but because emotional energy is unmistakable. When a woman turns inward, her light becomes stronger, and a man who once took it for granted begins to feel the absence of it like a cold wind he wasn't prepared for. Your withdrawal becomes a spiritual signal that something irreplaceable has been removed. This is why men return after no contact. They feel the energy shift long before they understand it. Without your emotional presence, their life becomes strangely quieter, but not in a comforting way. It feels empty, hollow, unbalanced. He may try to distract himself, bury himself in work, talk to others, or convince himself that he's fine without you. But the lack of your energy persists, like a missing frequency he was unconsciously tuned to. And this shift doesn't just affect him, it transforms you. When you stop giving energy to someone who cannot meet you at the same level, you begin to restore the parts of yourself that you neglected. The exhaustion you felt begins to fade. The anxiety quiets. The emotional weight lifts. You start feeling clarity instead of confusion, strength instead of longing, and peace instead of attachment. This transformation is powerful, and he feels it even from a distance. When a woman's energy recalibrates, her presence becomes magnetic. She doesn't need to speak it, announce it, or prove it. He senses the change. The most profound part is that your energy shift exposes truth. It reveals who was benefiting from your emotional presence, but not honoring it. A man who truly values you will respond to this shift with reflection, humility, and effort. A man who only valued the comfort you provided will return because he misses the energy you once gave freely. Either way, your energy becomes the compass, and your silence becomes the catalyst for his realization. Men don't return simply because they miss a woman. They return because they sense a transformation within her, a shift in energy, identity, and intention that they cannot explain, yet cannot ignore. When you stop depending on his attention to feel valuable, when you stop waiting for his message to feel validated, when you stop measuring your worth through his willingness to choose you, something powerful happens. You return to yourself. And the moment you come back home to your own soul, a man who once overlooked your presence begins to feel an undeniable pull toward it. Before, he may have seen you as available, predictable, emotionally open, and ready to pour into him without hesitation. He may have felt a sense of comfort in knowing that no matter what he did, no matter how distant he became, you would still be there trying to understand him, trying to fix things, trying to hold the connection together. But when you shift from longing to self-ownership, that pattern breaks. You stop giving your emotional energy away freely. You stop centering your world around someone who did not center his world around you. You stop abandoning yourself just to keep him. This transformation is internal, but its impact radiates outward. You begin to walk differently, think differently, respond differently. The emotional weight you once carried begins to fall away. The confusion that clouded your mind starts to clear. You start to live for yourself again, your peace, your growth, your dreams. And when a woman reclaims herself, her aura changes. She becomes stronger, calmer, more grounded, more magnetic. A man feels this shift not through words, but through the silence that carries a new sense of certainty. Suddenly, you are no longer the woman who waits by the phone. You are no longer the woman who breaks her own heart to protect his feelings. You are no longer the woman who sacrifices her needs for the sake of keeping someone who isn't ready. You have stepped into a different version of yourself, more confident in your boundaries, more aligned with your truth, more aware of your power. And this version of you is one he has never met before. This version of you is the one he realizes he underestimated. Men return when they feel the loss of the emotional access they once had, but they stay when they sense the rise of a woman who is no longer emotionally dependent on them. Your transformation disrupts the dynamic he once relied on. He goes from taking you for granted to questioning himself. He goes from assuming you need him to wondering if he is good enough for the woman you are becoming. And that shift is what pulls him back. He doesn't come back because you were waiting. He comes back because you stopped waiting. He doesn't come back because you lacked something. He comes back because you found yourself again. And when a woman returns to her own soul, the world around her cannot help but feel the change. No contact is often misunderstood as a tactic to make someone chase you, but in truth, it is a journey back to your highest self. It is a process of shedding, healing, awakening, and evolving. When you step into silence, not as a weapon, but as a sanctuary, you create space for transformation. And this transformation is what he feels long before he understands it. Men don't return simply because they miss your presence. They return because your evolution awakens a realization in them that cannot be ignored. The moment you rise, the moment you grow, the moment you shift into a stronger, more aligned version of yourself, the energy between you changes. And in that shift, he becomes aware of everything he once overlooked. Your silence becomes the cocoon where your self-worth strengthens. You begin to confront the patterns you tolerated, the emotional crumbs you accepted, the versions of yourself you abandoned just to keep someone else comfortable. In this quiet space, you begin to see clearly who you were, who you are, and who you are becoming. You start to heal wounds you didn't realize were open. You begin to detach not from love, but from the illusion that you needed someone else to complete you. And as you evolve, your energy no longer vibrates at the frequency of longing or desperation. It vibrates at the frequency of confidence and clarity. This internal shift has a powerful external impact. A man who once felt secure in your emotional availability suddenly senses that something is different. You are no longer emotionally anchored to him. You are no longer tied to his inconsistency. You are no longer seeking his validation to feel whole. Your growth breaks the emotional cycle that once kept him comfortable. And as you expand, he feels the decline of his influence. This awakening often hits him not as a thought, but as a feeling, a deep, unsettling realization that the woman he thought would always be there is evolving into someone he may no longer have access to. And this is where realization awakens within him. He begins to reflect, not because you asked him to, but because your evolution forces him to confront what he lost. He starts to see the moments he dismissed, the love he downplayed, the comfort he took for granted. He realizes that the version of you he once knew is gone, and in her place stands a woman who has grown beyond who she was when he last had her. Growth is magnetic. Healing is magnetic. Transformation is magnetic. When you rise, you silently challenge him to rise as well, or be left behind. Your evolution becomes the mirror he never dared to look into. And in that mirror, he sees not only the woman you've become, but the man he failed to be. This realization is what pulls him back with a force he cannot explain. Not because you tried to make him return, but because your growth awakened a truth in him. Losing you is not the same as losing attention. It is losing the opportunity to stand beside a woman who has stepped into her power. Your evolution is the reason he returns. Your becoming is the reason he wakes up. Your rise is the reason he finally sees what he didn't see before.